how you doing, man?
Hey, Kelly. Happy New Year, man.
Happy New Year to you, 2025. And we don't have flying cars.
I know. Isn't that something? Would you have thought in 1980 that 2025 would be so similar?
Yeah, I mean, I was still expecting CD-ROMs to be around, or were they even around in 1980? I guess
Probably
they weren't.
not. No.
I was still expecting Photomat to be here, but
Right. Yeah.
but it's not. Yeah, it is. It's so similar but so different. You know, it seems like there are these things that have come along that have really, really changed and revolutionized things. Everybody's talking about AI right now. Of course, you and I use it for several parts of this show, and have talked about it before. But it's just because it's been so incremental. Maybe if you took somebody from 1980 and brought them to 2025, it would feel very vastly different.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, just phones for one, how much they've changed everything. But maybe in 5 years, we'll be doing an episode on what was AI.
Yeah, I hope so. I sure hope so. Well, today I'm going back to the meat and potatoes, the bread and butter, the kind of stuff we love. This is going to be an episode about an interesting, a dead person.
Adam.
That's more than bread and butter. That's like probably ribs and apples.
Oh, I see what you did there. Good.
No, I want to talk about somebody that was actually born in 1858 and died in 1919.
Okay.
An American.
All of a sudden, I'm picturing a handlebar mustache.
Ooh, I had a feeling that no matter what clues I gave, you were going to guess this pretty quickly.
I didn't guess it, but just that time period immediately gives me a handlebar mustache and maybe a ride on one of those bicycles with
a penny farther.
Yeah, penny farther.
Which, by the way, I'm going to do on a dead end someday. I swear that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I really want to do that. But
we've talked about them several times tangentially.
Yeah. Well, this guy is very tangential for us.
Oh, he's been mentioned a few times.
He's been mentioned. He was a sickly child, drove an ambulance in World War I. No, he didn't really. But he was a sickly child. And he did advocate. He grew up with asthma, and his parents were kind of scared by it. He was in Manhattan. He was from a well-to-do family, and his family actually traveled and gave him a good worldliness. And he saw a doctor that told him he should actually lead a strenuous life, and that would help make him stronger.
Okay, so was he known for his strength?
Not his strength, but just his general manliness. Like, he's probably one of the most manly guys, aside from Evel Knievel and Andre the Giant. He's right up there in his manliness, his bravery, his... he did things like he climbed the Matterhorn. He raised cattle and rode horses out in Dakotas.
Was he a politician?
Yes, he was.
Was he Teddy Roosevelt?
He was Theodore Roosevelt Jr., also known as TR, also known as Colonel Roosevelt, also known as the Colonel, but known as Teddy to his demise. He did not like the name Teddy.
So did I call him Teddy just now?
Yeah.
I apologize.
He's dead. He doesn't care.
So no handlebar mustache, but nonetheless, a very iconic bushy mustache.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't handlebar, but it was of the age. And his glasses were very much of the age. And his general look and mannerisms were very much of the age.
Yeah, very macho, manly, badass kind of legendary figure. Yeah, you're right.
Well, interestingly, you say the word macho. I don't actually think that was his vibe. He was kind of an intellectual. He was very worldly. He was very well-spoken, and he wrote and read. So I don't know if macho is the right word, but I think he really tried to push himself physically because he had experienced this asthma and, such a sickly childhood. And it seemed to actually do him good. It pushed him into the, sort of the fake it till you make it thing physically.
But I consider myself a macho intellectualist. So they're not mutually exclusive.
Wasn't that a song in the 70s by the Village People, Macho Intellectualist? Alex has to be one. Well, he was born to Martha Stewart Bullock.
Martha Stewart.
Martha Stewart Bullock and Theodore Roosevelt Sr. in Manhattan. He had an older sister named Anna, who they called Bammy, and he had a younger brother named Elliot, and he had a younger sister named Corinne. But he was fairly, debilitated with asthma as a child. And a little bit later in his life, he was born in 1858. When he was like 11 or 12, he went on some family trips to Europe and to Egypt. And that really kind of made him a lot more interested in the globe as a whole. I think most Americans today don't even have a passport, right? Less than 50% have a passport.
Yeah, I'm sure. I think probably more now that you need one to go to Canada and Mexico than there used to be. I think it used to be in the 20%. So.
Well, he was a well-traveled person. He actually was picked on as a kid. Some boys had bullied him, and he decided he was going to get into boxing. So he actually became a boxer. He still boxed when he was mayor of New York, as a matter of fact.
I think another constant, a recurring theme on this show is people get bullied and then they become notable icons.
Yeah, I think that's what happened to us.
So, keep getting bullied out there. It'll work out for you.
Or maybe keep bullying, if you want to make somebody strong and important in the world.
But bullies themselves, I don't think ever end up on this show.
No, they don't. They're these boys who bullied him, who turned him into a boxer and a wrestler, and he actually took lessons in judo. They actually did him a favor, right? He became who he was. He was also, interestingly, though, very interested in animals and zoology and conservationism. As a matter of fact, when he was about, 9 years old, he saw a dead seal. No, he was 7. I just see this in my notes. He was 7. He saw a dead seal at a market, and he negotiated to get the seal's head. And then he took that head and he learned how to do taxidermy, and he taxidermied the seal's head. And he started catching, killing, or finding dead animal carcasses and making a whole natural history museum in his house.
Interesting. You ever done any taxidermy in your life?
I never have, but I do remember before I moved to Sugar Land, I lived in a little town called Huffman in Northeast Houston, and it was pretty country out there. And I remember being in 5th grade or 6th grade, and one of the kids in my class was taking taxidermy lessons, like going to taxidermy school in 6th grade.
It's a lost art, really.
Well, I don't know that it's lost. I think there's still a lot of people that do it.
In Huffman, especially, yeah.
Yeah, Huffman. I mean, but it's pretty amazing what they can do with these animals. But he was actually homeschooled, so he didn't have a chance to go to taxidermy school. His mother never taught him that. But after being homeschooled, he ended up going to Harvard. And his father said, I thought this was a great quote from his father, "Take care of your morals first, your health next, and finally your studies."
Yeah, I like that order.
Yeah,
nothing wrong with that.
He was going to study natural science, but then his father died 2 years after he started at Harvard, leaving him a lot of money, $60,000, which was about almost $1.9 million today.
Whoa.
But he could have lived on that. He could have just coasted, but he decided instead to write a book while he was at Harvard called The Naval War of 1812. He was very into Navy history. He was very into military history. He studied that like crazy. And actually, that Naval War of 1812 book is still studied today by military strategists. Yeah, a lot of people don't know. He had several published books we'll talk about.
It's amazing. That's another thing that's kind of a constant in this show is that people doing things at a young age.
Yeah.
Already hitting their stride at 16, 17 years old.
Yeah, 1878, he was 20 years old, and when this book came out. I think he did graduate from Harvard, came back to New York, and started attending Republican meetings at a place called Morton Hall. His father had been a big Republican, and he kind of followed in his footsteps. Now, the parties were very different back then. We won't get into all that, but let's just say that, what you think of as a Republican today isn't necessarily what it was back then. And same thing with Democrats. But he would go to these Republican meetings. He ended up meeting a woman named Alice Hathaway Lee, and he married her in 1880. And that's, when he climbed the Matterhorn in the Swiss Alps was during his honeymoon. So could you imagine on your honeymoon if you had said, hey, honey, I'm going to go climb one of the most difficult mountain climbing adventures without you. You stay here and, spa day or whatever they did back then. Have you ever seen a picture of the Matterhorn?
I think so. Yeah.
It's pretty much just like a straight up chimney kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah. It's not, there's no gentle slope about it. And I just kind of looked up, in today's world, it's still considered one of the most difficult climbs you can do.
Probably can't be home by dinner.
No. I think it must have been a long honeymoon, or else he spent most of the time on doing the.
A little selfish.
Yeah, maybe so. In 1881, he won an election to the New York State Assembly, and that's kind of where he discovered that he liked fighting corruption. So you know this about him, that he was a big reformer.
Yeah,
I guess because there's so many Roosevelts that are famous, maybe it's hard to keep up with which one was which and who did what. But Teddy Roosevelt was really into reform. He actually kind of ticked a lot of people off because of that, but we'll get into that in a minute. In 1884, he and Alice, his wife, had a daughter, also named Alice. And unfortunately, 2 days later, his wife died from kidney failure, which she had some sort of kidney problem that was masked by the birth or by her pregnancy. And she was only 22 years old. And the same day, his mother died of typhoid fever.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Not from Mary, though.
Let's hope not. I mean, she was in New York for a while. And if you haven't listened to the Typhoid Mary episode, you might want to check that out to learn how perhaps she had something to do with the death.
Maybe just pause this right now. Go listen to the entirety of Typhoid Mary and then resume. And then
or we could just insert it. We could just insert that episode.
You make your decision on whether or not Alice Roosevelt got typhoid from Typhoid Mary.
Well, that was actually his mother that got it.
Right.
Martha Stewart.
So many Alice's.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So his mother got typhoid. His wife
died from kidney failure
in childbirth. So now he's like a single dad.
He's
not even a mom
dad
to help out.
Well, that's where his sister Bammy came in and took his daughter, took care of his daughter for the first 3 years of her life. I mean, he was a mess, right? His wife and mother had died. His father had died not too long before that. He kind of used that grief, I guess, to focus on his work. And he started looking, he had been elected to the state assembly, and he started looking at ways to investigate, prosecute, and stop corruption. And that was a thing. One of the things back then was the party system, the bosses, the party bosses. All of that stuff was starting to take shape or was in the midst of going on. And one of the things he really did at that time was he went after the mayor's office, as part of the state assembly. He said the mayor had too much power.
Morals first.
Yeah. I guess he listened to his father. He was liked by many, disliked by a lot of other people, but he was getting noticed. And one of the biggest things he did was at the Republican National Convention, the same year that his mother and wife died, he gave a speech and supported an African-American named John Lynch to be the chair of the convention, which was kind of unheard of back then.
Yeah. What year would that have been?
1884.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
And I think that earned him, obviously, the ire of some people and the respect of others, but, he was choosing his sides. And he also, during the presidential election of 1884, he was not a big fan of this guy named Blaine, who was the Republican nominee. Well, he made it known that he didn't like Blaine. There was another Republican that he liked. I forgot the other guy's name, but there was a different Republican that he liked. But then there was this group of Republicans called the Mugwumps. You ever heard of these guys?
I thought they were part of the British invasion. The
Mugwumps? No, they were actually part of Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it could be either one, couldn't it?
Could be either one.
They were
that'd be a great game show. British Invasion Band or Harry Potter spell.
Or political party.
Or political party. Well, the Mugwumps were a group of Republicans who were very opposed. They were extreme reformist, extremely against political corruption. And they felt like this guy Blaine was under the hands or the thumb of the political machine. So they flipped over and supported Grover Cleveland, who was a Democrat. But Teddy saw that as political suicide and wouldn't do it. So rather than supporting Grover Cleveland, he actually just gave speeches about how bad the Democratic Party was. He supported the Republican Party and put down the Democratic Party, but wouldn't say anything good about Blaine.
Okay.
So the Mugwumps were mad at him. They were like, "Hey, man, that's not cool. You're a reformer. You should be with us. You should, go with the right person." Roosevelt was like, "I'm out of here." So he stopped politics for a little while. He had been to the Dakota Territory to hunt bison the year before, and he loved it. As a matter of fact, when he got out there, a lot of people looked at him and thought he was just this little man with glasses and kind of paunchy and pale and didn't really know what was going on. And by the time he left, he was respected as a cowboy
because he grew the mustache.
Yes, that's the key. If you ever go to Yellowstone, or if you want to be one of the cowboys out there. No, he actually said of cowboys, he said, "A cowboy possesses few of the emasculated milk and water moralities admired by the pseudo-philanthropists, but he does possess, to a very high degree, the stern, manly qualities that are invaluable to a nation." That was his take on cowboys.
And of course, the Dakotas weren't states yet.
No, Dakota Territory.
Yeah.
So during that time, after the death of his wife and mother, and after he kind of got this rebuke from the Mugwumps in the Republican Party because he wouldn't switch over to the Democrats to support their candidate, et cetera, et cetera. He started going back and forth between New York and Dakota Territories. He actually built a ranch called Elkhorn Ranch in North Dakota, or what is now North Dakota, and he learned how to ride Western style, because I think a lot of these guys could ride because they were gentlemen, but they didn't know how to ride Western style. It's a little different.
What is Western style? Does that mean without a saddle?
No, that's bareback. Western style is different than an English style. I think most people in the cities rode an English saddle, and a Western saddle has the saddle horn because it's used for working cattle and things like that. It's a different kind of saddle, a different style of riding. Western is more, I guess, efficient, but not as showy as riding English. Okay. But he also learned how to rope. He learned how to hunt. He learned about things like having to do with the ecology of the land, like overgrazing. He actually organized the ranchers to help address problems of overgrazing. He formed what was called the Boone and Crockett Club. You can imagine who that was named after. Their goal was to conserve large game animals and their habitats. And he became the deputy sheriff of Billings County, North Dakota at one point. Even hunted down some criminals with posses.
Yeah, it sounds like the life.
Yeah, totally different than Manhattan. But in 1886, 1887, he lost his herd of cattle because he wanted to be a cattle rancher. He lost them to severe weather wiped out all his cattle. So he returned to New York, and basically he felt like North Dakota or the Dakotas territories had helped him overcome the label that people saw him as an ineffective intellectual. Like he could back it up with toughness. Yeah,
and I'm sure it changes your perspective just on how big the country is or how big it could be and what's all out there, conservation. I mean, I'm sure it changes a man.
I think it did. And I think upon returning, he was reinvigorated, and he was actually asked to run for mayor of New York City, which he did, but he lost. He was still a little bit of an unknown at that point, not as well known as the other candidates. But after that, he spent a little time writing his second book called Winning the West. And this was a 4-volume set about the tracking of the tracking westward of Americans, basically. And I actually Googled it and looked for it. To buy an original printing of this, which sold out when it was first printed, is like, I don't know, $3,500 for 4 books.
So you bought it.
Yeah. Happy birthday. So in 1988, he was appointed by President Harrison to the Civil Service Commission, and he actually served there for 7 years. And this was another place where he was able to put reforms in place. He kind of fought against the spoil system. He demanded civil service laws and really tried to make things better for workers, tried to make things better for consumers. And the newspapers described him as irrepressible, belligerent, and enthusiastic, which I guess is what you would want.
He's just doing his job.
He was doing his job, and he had a little bit of friction with President Harrison, but President Harrison actually backed him up. Like he was like, yeah, I realize he's a bull in a china shop, but he's going the distance. Well, with all of that said, his next move after he finished on the Civil Service Commission was to become police commissioner of New York. Now, again, lots of corruption going on back then, and he was the perfect man for that because he didn't care. He wanted to just radically reform the police force. He had regular inspections of firearms. He had physical exams of the police officers to make sure they were up to snuff. He recruited people based on their qualifications, not on their political affiliation. He established the idea of meritorious service medals. He had telephones installed in station houses. That didn't exist before him.
It's technology. He's kind of conservationist, but also tech guy.
Yeah. And a reformer. One of the things that he would do is he would walk the police beats at night and early in the morning to make sure that the policemen were actually there on duty. He knew where they were supposed to be, and he would walk around to see if he were there. And he also fought against bars and establishments being open on Sunday. Remember that from the Prohibition?
Yeah, blue laws.
Yep, he was an advocate of the blue laws. Not for any moral thing. It was law, and he was trying to enforce
rules
the law.
are rules, man.
Yeah. Well, then after he was New York City Police Commissioner, he became Assistant Secretary of the Navy, like Dwight Schrute. Assistant to the Secretary of the Navy.
I think the job's a little more important.
He actually, though, had a lot of say because the actual Secretary of the Navy was kind of in poor health, and so he left a lot of the decisions to Roosevelt. Remember I told you earlier he had written this book about the War of 1812 and the U.S. Navy, and it's still read there. Well, Roosevelt actually got more and more involved in the Navy and had a huge buildup of naval strength. He made sure that the U.S. built up battleships, and eventually we became second only to England during Roosevelt's during his presidency. We were second only to England in naval strength. Which, if you think about like the Spanish Armada and France and all these other countries that have been around a lot longer, we really
built it up.
Yeah, we built it up. Like it was like pumping iron for him. He also believed that there were certain regions like the Caribbean and Cuba where we needed more defense, and that there were some possible hostile countries in there, like Spain. And so he really wanted Cuba to be neutral or independent from Spain. He didn't like the fact that Spain was taking hold there. So in 1898, there was an explosion aboard a ship docked in the harbor of Havana. The USS Maine. It exploded. In hindsight, it's said that it was probably an accident. It was probably caused by a boiler room or something like that. But the American government immediately blamed Spain. They said, this is Spanish, this is Spain's fault. You guys blew up our ship. And so they tried to, for a little while, McKinley, the president, tried to have a diplomatic solution, but Roosevelt was kind of gunning for war. He wanted to kick Spain's butt and get them out of there, out of Cuba at that time. So I don't know how much you know about the Spanish-American War.
Not
in
much.
1898. Yeah,
No,
I
just
really
about
didn't
what
either.
you just said.
Well, yeah, this ship was blown up. War was declared on Spain, and mostly to get them out of the Western Hemisphere, to get them out of our area. Well, he resigned as the assistant secretary to the Navy, and he actually volunteered along with a guy named Colonel Leonard Wood, who was a regular Army guy, to start a cavalry regiment. And you know what their nickname became?
The Rough Riders?
The Rough Riders. That's right. He was begged by his wife and his family not to do this. He had never been in combat before. He had never been in the military. He was a good horseback rider. He was a good shot. He could fire a gun, and he was a rough and tough guy, but he had never done this. So apparently it was pretty common during the Spanish-American War for these volunteer organizations to come together and fight alongside what they called the Army regulars, people, just regular Army people. They trained in San Antonio, Texas, and after several weeks of training, they took a ship down to Cuba. And what's interesting about this group of people, the Rough Riders, they were not only ex-military people. Some of them were Ivy League educated people. Some of them were Native Americans. They had Native Americans in the group. They had former soldiers. They had athletes that he had been friends with, boxers and football players that Roosevelt had known that joined. He and this guy, Leonard Wood, put an ad out asking for volunteers, and they got too many volunteers. Almost like Shackleton when he was going to the South Pole.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone wanted to be a part of the Rough Riders.
And the nice thing was, well, first of all, they didn't call themselves that. That was something that was bestowed upon them by the press. But what a great name, right? There could have been a lot worse names.
So did you know that there's a minor league baseball team in Frisco, Texas, just north of Dallas, and they are called the Frisco Rough Riders, and their logo is Teddy Roosevelt with a cowboy hat and like a bandana scarf.
Oh, nice.
With the glasses and the mustache, and that's their logo.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
It's like an F with Teddy Roosevelt's face on it.
Nice. Well, so they ended up going down into Cuba, and they had several charges. And actually, they didn't have a lot of horses. So Roosevelt was one of the only people that got to ride a horse. A lot of these men were on foot. But as I was saying before, it was a very diverse group of people, racially and from economic backgrounds. But according to the information and the biographies and such about Roosevelt, they really had a very open relationship with all these folks. Like, it was one of these things where they all bonded and they were all on a common mission. They were Americans first, and whatever else they were second. So that was kind of cool. They had a lot of success by taking on this battle at Kettle Hill was one of them. And there was also a battle known as San Juan Heights. And they were able to force the Spanish to retreat from those positions. They were pretty strategic positions on the island.
So did all the battles of the Spanish-American War take place in Cuba?
That's a great question.
I don't think any were in the U.S. because
I don't think Spain ever attacked mainland U.S. and I don't think we ever attacked mainland Spain. That wouldn't really make sense. I think it was about the islands down there that Spain had a hold of and that we wanted a hold of. Yeah, it'd be like us taking over Mallorca, right? The U.S. takes over Mallorca, and they're like, no, that's our vacation spot.
So you're saying that in the Spanish-American War, it didn't take place in Spain or America.
Or America, right. Well, that's who it was against. Those were the contenders. Well, the battles were, they were intense, and there was a lot that, I don't want to just gloss over it. And by the way, I'm going to tell everybody, I should have said this at the onset, Teddy Roosevelt, there's a lot to cover, and so I'm trying to go through things quickly, but I'm going to leave some things out, I'm sure. But just know, these are the highlights.
Let's just say that about every episode that we ever do.
we should have a disclaimer. Yeah.
We only have a few minutes here, guys. We're not trying to give you everything you need. We're going to whet your appetite so you want to go and learn more.
That's good. WHET.
Sure. Yeah, wet.
Yeah. So I also was lectured by Alex about not going too long on this before we started. Before the tape starts rolling, Alex gives me all the rules. He says, "Don't call me out for lecturing you in the episode, by the way, whatever you do."
And Kelly says, "Hey man, Joe Rogan goes 3 hours. Why can't we go 3 hours?"
That's right. So after Roosevelt had this battle at San Juan Heights, this lasted for a period of time. I think it went from July to August. He was there for 2 months or so. He called it the greatest day of his life, that battle. And he wanted to be called Colonel Roosevelt or the Colonel, or even Theodore, but he did not like the name Teddy. And I think you know how he got the name. Do you want to give your idea of how he got it? And I can tell you if there's anything I see differently as far as what I learned.
I don't know how. I mean, I thought just Teddy was a nickname for Theodore. I thought Teddy.
No. Okay, I'm actually talking about the teddy bear. Yeah, I'm talking about how the teddy bear came to be named Teddy.
Oh, I assumed that was after Teddy Roosevelt.
It is,
and it was probably because the original. This is my guess. I just think original teddy bears used to have glasses, and people thought that was because Teddy Roosevelt had glasses. But I'm betting that your research has shown that teddy bears existed before Teddy Roosevelt. And my take is because teddy bears don't have mustaches, they couldn't have anything to do with Theodore Roosevelt.
And they're not alive. They're not real. No. So actually,
how much of that did I get right?
None of it. None of it.
Right.
So the name originated from an incident. It was the teddy bear came after Teddy Roosevelt. So teddy bears came after Teddy Roosevelt. They were because of him. He had gone in 1902 to Mississippi. He was invited by the governor to go on a hunting trip. They were going to hunt for bears, American black bears. And they were part of a large group of hunters who were all competing. Whoever got the biggest animal would win, I guess. That's what they did back then. And so they're going around. He's got his entourage with him. Well, his entourage cornered, clubbed, and tied a black bear to a tree after it had been chased by the hounds. And this was, by the way, a cub. So it wasn't even a full-size bear. It was a bear cub. And when Roosevelt got there, they encouraged him to shoot it. They were going to untie it briefly and let him shoot it so that they could say, "Oh, he killed a bear." Roosevelt said, "Nope. I don't think that's sporting. I think it's unsportsmanlike to kill this bear or for me to shoot this bear. But we should kill it anyway because you've beat it so badly that it's going to suffer." So they ended up killing the bear. But the Washington Post got a hold of this, and in November of 1902, they published a political cartoon that showed Teddy Roosevelt not killing the bear, basically saying, "No, I won't kill the bear." And that led to the idea by this guy named Morris Michtom, who saw that cartoon. He owned a shop, and he put a plush bear cub with glasses in the window of his shop and called it Teddy's Bear and sold them. And it caught on with bigger toy manufacturers and eventually became a whole thing.
So people did call him Teddy then?
They called him Teddy. Yeah, Teddy was not because of teddy bears. He was called Teddy. And he didn't...
But he didn't like that.
I don't think he minded teddy bears. I don't think he liked the name Teddy, though.
So tell me why the lingerie item, the Teddy, was named after him.
That never came up.
I mean, it couldn't have been. I mean, his honeymoon didn't probably involve any teddies.
Well, he was out climbing mountains, right?
That's what I'm saying.
That's
what I'm saying. So he's probably never seen a teddy.
I don't even know if kids today. I don't even know if that's still a thing. We'll have to do some research. But then clear your browser history after you do that research.
You don't think that that Victoria's Secret sells teddies anymore? I think they call it something else.
Is there even still Victoria's Secret? Is that still a thing?
Yeah, man.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll find out. But I have no idea. But that's where the teddy bear comes from, was from this incident in Mississippi where he didn't shoot the bear.
And that's an awful graphic story. If a kid asks you, where does the name teddy bear come from? I would skip that story.
Or maybe just tell him that Roosevelt
eaten.
didn't shoot the bear himself.
Sure.
But say the word himself after the kid's already left. Roosevelt didn't shoot the bear. And then wait, kid walks out of the room. You say himself.
Right. Because it was badly
because it had been clubbed so badly. So he ended up, after this this thing with the Rough Riders, he decided to run for governor of New York. And he wanted to do this in cooperation with the political machine to some degree, because he had to. In order to get the nomination, he had to cooperate to some degree. But he was a reformer at heart. He ended up winning the governorship of New York by 1%. It was that close.
Oh, wow.
And this is where he talked about one of the first times he mentioned the idea of the square deal. So the square deal was mentioned in a few cases, one time where he was negotiating with labor, but he said in this case, the rules were, if he was going to be governor, that he had to have honesty in public affairs. He had to be equitable, and his society in New York, people in New York, had to be equitable in the sharing of privileges and responsibility. And he had to subordinate the party, the Republican Party, to the interests of the people in the state.
Wow. Morals first.
Yeah. We could use some of that. Always. Keep that in mind, folks, if you run for office. Square deal. He was one of the first people to ever do a press conference.
Really?
Yeah. He did that both as a governor as well as the president.
I guess because electronic media was just starting then.
Well, no, it had more to do with he saw the value of letting the press in and tell their story. He wanted to be in the news. And he also kind of, apparently there was a time when he was president. This was later. He wasn't president for another several years after he was governor. But there was a time when he actually let the press in because they were all standing out on the White House lawn, and he let them come in from the cold. And he actually gave them a room. He said, we'll give you a room. And that's how the modern press briefing room came to be.
That room is very small. Have you ever heard or seen that?
I've only seen, from press conferences. It doesn't look that small, but maybe it's smaller than it looks.
Yeah, they say it's like mission control at NASA, that
it's smaller
very,
in person.
Very, very tiny. Yeah, I think it's only about 10 chairs across.
Oh, wow. That's why it always looks so crowded.
Yeah, it is crowded.
Well, he did things as governor, like he pushed the franchise tax bill. He made sure that companies who were actually doing business in the state paid taxes to help with the infrastructure that allowed them to do business. And this is kind of getting into some of his politics here. New York at the time was the most populous state in the Union. And so he had a lot of responsibility. I mean, if you think about it today, being the governor of New York or California is a lot different than being the governor of Montana or New Mexico, right?
Sure.
No offense to Montana or New Mexico, but
just
fewer people.
Yeah.
He then was asked to run for vice president, to be nominated, because Vice President Garrett Hobart died, and Garrett Hobart had been the vice president under McKinley, and when he died, they put Roosevelt on the ticket. He won. He and McKinley won, and he was bored. He actually really hated being vice president because he felt like there wasn't a whole lot to it. He did that for a short period of time, and then on September 6th, 1901, McKinley was assassinated in Buffalo, New York. And when he was, I should say he was shot in Buffalo, New York. He survived, Roosevelt came back to see him, he seemed to be getting better, and then he took a turn for the worse and died, and that made Roosevelt president.
Wow.
So his first time in office wasn't through election. It was, well, he was elected as vice president, but he took over for McKinley.
What year was that?
That was in 1901 when he became president in September of 1901. One of the things he did that was pretty innovative for the time, I had mentioned earlier about nominating a person of color to the Republican convention's chair. He invited Booker T. Washington to the White House.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which was pretty radical at the time and certainly ticked off a lot of people in the segregated South. He ended up, he had dinner with Booker T. Washington, and that made such a stink among people who, shouldn't have made a stink, but did. And he decided to stay friendly with Booker T, but only in business appointments rather than dinner. I think that's what ticked the Southerners off, was that they let a black man sit at the table. So, but good on Teddy Roosevelt for doing that, right?
Of course, man. And probably way more interesting to have dinner with than any of those other fools.
Yeah, it's probably
usually
true.
had dinner with.
I would agree. Just speculating, but he became a trust buster. I think we talked a little bit about the Sherman Antitrust Act and how that broke up Standard Oil.
Yeah.
See the Rockefeller episode for that one. He actually, during his presidency, he brought 44 antitrust lawsuits to, he enforced 44 antitrust suits. During the presidencies of the three predecessors, that's Benjamin Harris, Grover Cleveland, and William McKinley, they had 18 combined. He did 44 by himself, and they did 6 each. So you could see he was definitely a trust buster.
Yeah, for sure.
Not a ghostbuster.
No.
He, as I mentioned before, he was part of a labor dispute with the coal miners in the U.S. in 1902, and this was another place where he talked about a square deal. He said, "My action on labor should always be considered in connection with my action as regards capital, and both are reducible to my favorite formula: a square deal for every man."
So he was on the labor side, or he was just trying to negotiate, or
he was able to strike a balance. He said, I mean, that's the point of that quote, is he's saying it's in connection with regards to capital, meaning capital as in commerce and money. So he's trying to strike a balance between the growth of the nation and the things that need to happen, the labor that needs to be done, the money that needs to be generated, along with the actual workers. And so it's one of those things where it sounds like he was probably hated by both sides.
Yeah.
But I think he saw it as what was the most fair. He was actually the first president to settle a labor dispute.
Wow. People that put morals first and their principles first are usually hated by both sides.
That's
right?
true. That's true. It's what they kind of say sometimes, is a compromise is, both sides. If both sides are unhappy, then you've got a good compromise, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Although you and I, we had our time today. We had it set for one thing. There was another time suggested. We met in the middle, and here we are.
We did, yeah.
Yeah. I'm like Roosevelt, and you're like McKinley.
Without getting shot.
Right. He also reformed the U.S. railroads through a thing called the Hepburn Act. He was one of the first people to actually look for pure food and drugs, with the eventual FDA that came out of his original Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. A lot of people were opposed to it because it was sort of anti-business. We didn't want government meddling in the food and drugs. But the book The Jungle, which came out in 1906, really galvanized support.
Upton Sinclair.
You ever read that book?
Oh, man. I really think about that book a lot, actually.
Oh.
Yeah, that's a awful tale of the way things used to be in this country.
And I think it changed. The world and influenced Roosevelt to have the guts to put out this Pure Food and Drug Act, which, again, the easiest thing to do, because his cronies would be against it because the money comes from these companies, would be not to do it. But He established the United States Forest Service. He signed the creation of 5 national parks. He signed the 1906 Antiquities Act, where they proclaimed 18 U.S. national monuments. He established bird sanctuaries for 51 different bird sanctuaries. He established 4 game preserves and 150 national forests.
Wow. You wonder what this country would be like if he hadn't come around, if somebody like him hadn't come around, if there would just be hotels on those spots, and if there wouldn't be national parks, and if there was nobody to champion those areas and kind of keep them preserved. You wonder 100 years later what things would look like. Probably not as pristine as they do in a lot of places today.
Yeah, and we've certainly screwed a lot of stuff up and overdeveloped in a lot of areas, but at least we have those things that I think are pretty much established. I think it would take a lot to overturn any of that. I mean, of course, there's political, conversation on both sides about drill, baby, drill, and all that sort of thing. But
selling national land
Well, he was unapologetic about it, and at the end of his tenure, he had 230 million acres that he had preserved.
Wow.
That's a lot. Small part of the country, but still much better than I think what people had done before that.
Yeah.
Of course, it was also, as we modernized and technology got better and more factories and cars and all that sort of thing, it was becoming a bigger problem, right? Before that, maybe there wasn't a need for it as much.
Yeah, but we were also expanding westward into some of those areas that where a lot of those national parks exist now too. A lot of them are in the West.
That's right. Well, he also was involved in a peace negotiation between Japan and Russia, and that conversation won him the Nobel Prize. Essentially, there was some concern from Japan and Russia about annexation of places like, we actually annexed Hawaii, right, in 1898. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of conversation about the Philippines and who should control that. And, it was one of those things where Roosevelt was able to successfully negotiate a truce between Japan and Russia, which I think is pretty cool. He also was a major driver behind the Panama Canal. Did you know that?
That's great.
It was but you know what it was done in the why it was done? National security.
Oh, sure.
And it was a naval thing. It enabled us to get ships from one ocean to the other much more quickly, which gave us a big advantage. As a matter of fact, there was a lot of concern about the presence of other countries in Latin America at the time, and the U.S. really wanted to make sure that we could have that canal built. Well, it was something where they were looking at putting it through a couple of different places. They were actually talking about Nicaragua at one point, and at the time, Panama was actually part of Colombia. Well, Roosevelt supported some Panamanian rebels, kind of on the down low. I don't know how this was done, but Panama became its own country because Roosevelt gave them the ability to break away from Colombia.
And then that enabled us to
build the Panama Canal.
So is that not the thinnest part of Central America?
I think there were a couple of places that would have worked, but yes, I think it was the optimal place to make the canal. He was the first president to make a trip out of continental U.S. on a diplomatic mission, which is what he did when he went to Panama and Puerto Rico in 1906. And he very much was seen as negotiating that deal with Panama very well, because it even though we gave them a lot of money and a lot of technology and a lot of things that helped them out, it really established us as a dominant naval force in the Western Hemisphere because of that pass-through. Otherwise, you got to go all the way around, right? You got to go all the way down and around.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, this was, kind of 1906, 1907. His second term in office was started in 1904, and he didn't have the kind of support in the second term as he'd had in the first term. He was kind of considered a lame duck because he said he wasn't going to run for a third term. I don't think there was a rule or a protocol or an amendment at that time that said he couldn't, but he said, in the interest of not being a dictator, I will not run for a third term. Well, he picked out Taft to be his, I think William Howard Taft to be his successor. That's who he was friends with Taft. He had been Roosevelt's Secretary of War, and Taft was kind of a made man. He was fighting against William Jennings Bryan, who was the Democrat, and Taft ended up winning the election. But then it turned out he wasn't nearly as good of a politician or a negotiator as Roosevelt had been, and really kind of fell out of favor with most of the Republicans as well as Roosevelt himself. So it was one of those things where he thought he could trust Taft to do what he wanted, but he didn't. So after leaving office in 1909, he went on safari, and he did that in under the sort of umbrella of the Smithsonian. So believe it or not, a lot of the artifacts in the Smithsonian were brought back by an expedition from Theodore Roosevelt.
So the Smithsonian already existed.
The Smithsonian existed, and Andrew Carnegie was behind a lot of the financing of this. He paid for this expedition to put all these artifacts into the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. Now, they went to East Africa, they traveled to the Congo, they went up the Nile, and they ended up in what's today Sudan. This group, it was a large group. It was a huge expedition, lots and lots of people. Just take a guess how many specimens they brought back that were either trapped or killed. Just give me a number.
Man, especially a taxidermist like that. Oh man, they probably brought back, 100?
Higher.
I don't know, 200?
11,400.
Wow.
11,400.
It seems excessive.
Well, it included 1,000 large animals, 512 big game animals, 6 rare white rhinos.
So maybe like elephants and rhinos and giraffes and everything.
All of that, and also moles and insects and hippopotamus.
To bring to the Smithsonian dead.
They were salted carcasses and skins when they were sent to Washington. But here's what Roosevelt had to say. Here's what he had to say.
Let's hear what he had to say for himself.
I can be condemned only if the existence of the National Museum, the American Museum of History, of Natural History, and all similar zoological institutions are also condemned.
Well,
he's got a point.
I mean, a lot of those have live animals, though.
Well, I mean, we're talking about museums, not zoos.
Well, you said other zoological.
Well, I think zoological. Places. Yeah, that's okay. Fair.
But showing a dinosaur is different than showing an elephant that was just minding his own business.
Yeah, I agree. Maybe 11,000 was excessive, but apparently all of those animals, or a vast majority of them, did end up in some place where people could see them. And okay, did we contribute? You can look at it in one hand. Did he contribute to the extinction of these animals, or did he preserve them for humans to gawk at and and study, right? All right. Well, we'll get off that soapbox.
Yeah. Complicated man.
So he comes back from his safari, and he chills out a little bit, but he realizes that Taft has gone in a direction he doesn't like. And he knows he said, I won't run for a third term. But what he meant was a third consecutive term. So he ends up running for president again. He said, I'm really sorry for Taft. I'm sure he means well, but he means well feebly. He does not know how. He is utterly unfit for leadership, and this is a time when we need leadership. So he said, if the people make a draft of me, I shall not decline to serve, in 1912. So the people made a draft of him, but the problem was Taft got the Republican nomination, so that wasn't available to him. He was He was relegated to a third party. Well, he's out. He's going to split the Republicans. He's going to do this thing. He's going to run. And while he was campaigning in Milwaukee, he gets shot by a shopkeeper. This guy shoots a bullet into his chest, penetrates his eyeglass case. Fortunately, he had a folded 50-page copy of his speech in his jacket, and that's what saved him. This was called Progressive Cause Greater Than Any Individual was the name of the speech.
Well, good thing it was 50 pages.
Well, it did go into his chest, and but it was slowed down enough that it was actually lodged. And Roosevelt, because he had experience with hunting and that sort of thing, he knew that if he wasn't coughing blood, it hadn't reached his lung, and so he knew he could survive. After he's shot, first of all, he says to the crowd, "Don't hurt this man," because they were gonna murder him right there. They were gonna string him up. But he says, "Don't hurt this man," had the police take him away. And then he gets up and gives a 90-minute speech after he's just been shot.
That is being a badass.
that is the definition of badass right there. So he finally finishes his speech. He goes to the hospital. Turns out that it lodged in his muscle. And the doctor said, you know what? We're not even going to take this bullet out because it would do more harm than good to remove the bullet. So he lived with that bullet in his chest the rest of his life.
If I get shot before one of these podcast episodes, I'll probably reschedule.
No, if you're coughing up blood, you can reschedule. But if you're not coughing up blood, you have to go on. I hope you have an eyeglass case and 50-page notes in your pocket, though.
Yeah.
So
always.
There was some discussion about whether he was fit to run, and the doctor said, or maybe I know what it was. He said to a reporter, "I'm as fit as a bull moose," and that is where they got the name Bull Moose Party. This third party, which was progressive. They had the symbol of the bull moose, and he spent 2 weeks recuperating, and he ended up running for president. And he got 27% of the vote. Taft got 23% of the vote, so they split the party. Woodrow Wilson got 42% of the vote and won the election.
Oh.
So he decides again, what's he going to do after this? He's going to travel. He goes to Latin America, South America, and he's going to go down there and do a research expedition. They're canoeing. They're in boats, and some of the boats had actually broken free. We're going to smash against some rocks. So what does this guy do? He jumps in the water, tries to save the boat, smashes his leg, ends up getting a flesh wound, nothing major, but guess what? It gets infected. He gets tropical fever, and he is sick as a dog. And to the point where he says to the rest of the crew that's with him, including his son's name was Kermit. He says, "Guys, I'm going to just kill myself with morphine. You guys go on." He was ready to do that. He was ready to just ingest a bunch of morphine, die, and let them continue. But they said no, especially his son. He loved his son. His son loved him. And he didn't. So he got back home. But at that point, he had lost like 40 or 50 pounds because of the sickness. And he actually said that he had cut 10 years off of his own life. Like he said that to a friend, and it ended up being true.
Wow.
For the rest of his life, he had a lot of problems with flare-ups from that illness. Well, World War I comes along in 1914. He supported the Allies. He wanted to be harsh against Germany. He was very interested in like what they were doing with submarines and felt like that was, unfair and unjust. Because we had a big Navy, obviously we were able to do some good things in World War II, or not good things, but win the fight. He got sicker and sicker, and in 1919, he was having breathing problems, and apparently his last words were to the family servant, James Amos, and he said, "Put that light out, James," or "Please put the light out, James," and then he died.
Wow.
And when he died, one of his sons, Archibald, telegraphed his siblings and said, "The old lion is dead."
Oh, man. How old was he?
Let's see. That was 1919, and he was born in He was born in 1858. So doing a little quick math here.
71.
Was he that old? Be 42 plus 19. 61.
Yeah, 61.
Oh. 61. Yeah, not a very old dude. There's people that lived, but talking about a big life, right?
So he was Eleanor Roosevelt's uncle, right?
Yes. He was Eleanor Roosevelt's uncle, and Franklin Delano was like a distant cousin.
Yeah.
So because they were kissing cousins, as we know.
But he was like his whose daughter was Eleanor Roosevelt? Like one of his siblings' daughters?
Yes, okay. I believe so. He obviously big presence. And one of the things too, he was often about the strenuous life. Like I said, he really wanted people to push themselves. As a matter of fact, he was very into watching football. And I don't know if you know this, but in the early 1900s, football was very violent. People died. People got maimed. People got, and it's. We had this whole controversy in a game recently. I won't mention the game, but you know which one I'm talking about with targeting, whether it was targeting or not. And I remember sitting there with my nephew, my daughter, my son, and my wife, and talking about how when we were younger, you and I, the hosts of this show, that was just called a good hit. Right. I mean, but I'm not, I like the fact that we're trying to be safer, but ironically, this guy who sort of, didn't like people to be wimps, he wanted them to have the strenuous life. He did actually encourage the Harvard and Yale football teams and some of the more famous football teams at that time to talk to their players about playing fair, about playing clean, and to not hurting each other so that they wouldn't have so many violent injuries. Yeah,
they were talking, people would die during games. I think you said that, but they were talking about banning football back then.
Yes. I think there's actually a movie called, or a short film or a Vox or something, because this is how I found this out, called How Theodore Roosevelt Saved Football. So might be something worth watching. He also was famous for the saying, speak softly and carry a big stick, which has been translated and spoke all over the place. He's on Mount Rushmore. He's the second one from the right, along with George Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. A lot of people I think he's not quite as famous as those other three guys, I don't think, to the general public. But to me, it seems like just even him having done the parks, being such a big part of the preservation, it's sort of fitting for him to be on the side of a mountain, right?
I agree. Yeah, for sure.
Several warships named after him, stamps, all of those, honors have been bestowed upon him. And I'll leave you with this, which I think is pretty cool. He was actually one of the very first presidents, or he was the first president. Maybe he wasn't the first, but one of the first presidents to have their voice recorded. And so you can actually listen to some of his speeches that were recorded and hear his actual voice.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So next time you're clutching your teddy bear late at night and you're camping in a national park, or you're looking at your taxidermy lion.
Or if you're in Africa and wonder why there's no animals left.
Thanks, Teddy. All right. Hope you enjoyed it. Happy 2025, everybody. We're looking forward to an awesome season.
The great fundamental issue now before our people can be stated briefly. It is, are the American people fit to govern themselves, to rule themselves, to control themselves? I believe they are. My opponents do not. I believe in the right of the people to rule. I believe that the majority of the plain people of the United States will, day in and day out, make fewer mistakes in governing themselves than any smaller class or body of men, no matter what their training, will make in trying to govern. I believe again that the American people are as a whole capable of self-control and of learning by their mistakes. Our opponents pay lip loyalty to this doctrine, but they show their real belief by the way in which they champion every device to make the nominal rule of the people a sham. I am not leading this fight as a matter of aesthetic pleasure. I am leading because somebody must lead, or else the fight would not be made at all. I prefer to work with moderate, with rational conservatives, provided only that they do in good faith strive forward towards the light. But when they halt and turn their backs to the light, sit with the scorners on the seats of reaction, then I must part company with them. We, the people, cannot turn back. Our aim must be steady, wise progress. It would be well if our people would study the history of a sister republic. All the woes of France for a century and a quarter have been due to the folly of her people in splitting into the two camps of unreasonable conservatism and unreasonable radicalism. Had pre-revolutionary France listened to men like Turgot and backed them up, all would have gone well. But the beneficiaries of privilege, the Bourbon reactionaries, the short-sighted ultra-conservatives, turned down Turgot and then found that instead of him they had obtained Robespierre. They gained 20 years' freedom from all restraint and reform at the cost of the whirlwind of the Red Terror, and in their turn the unbridled extremists of the terror induced a blind reaction. And so, with convulsion and oscillation from one extreme to another, with alternations of violent radicalism and violent Bourbonism, the French people went through misery toward a shattered goal. May we profit by the experiences of our brother Republicans across the water and go forward steadily, avoiding all wild extremes. And may our ultra-conservatives remember that the rule of the Bourbons brought on the revolution. And may our would-be revolutionaries remember that no Bourbon was ever such a dangerous enemy of the people and of freedom as the professed friend of both Robespierre. There is no danger of a revolution in this country, but there is grave discontent and unrest, and in order to remove them there is need of all the wisdom and probity and deep-seated faith in and purpose to uplift humanity we have at our command. Friends, our task as Americans is to strive for social and industrial justice achieved through the genuine rule of the people. This is our end, our purpose. The methods for achieving the end are merely expedients, to be finally accepted or rejected according as actual experience shows that they work well or ill. But in our hearts we must have this lofty purpose, to strive for it in all earnestness and sincerity, or our work will come to nothing. In order to succeed, we need leaders of inspired idealism, leaders to whom are granted great visions, who dream greatly and strive to make their dreams come true, who can kindle the people with the fire from their own burning souls. The leader, for the time being, whoever he may be, is but an instrument to be used until broken and then to be cast aside. And if he is worth his salt, he will care no more when he is broken than a soldier cares when he is sent where his life is forfeit, in order that the victory may be won. In the long fight for righteousness, the watchword for all of us is spend and be spent.